It's been a week since we found out that Red Bull would swap Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda starting from this weekend's Japanese Grand Prix. But new revelations have emerged, and it's been the only real talking point on day one here at Suzuka. We've heard from Max Verstappen for the first time about a change that he's clearly unhappy with, and from Lawson and Tsunoda themselves. But John, before we get into that, let's back up slightly and cover what Red Bull bosses Christian Horner and Helmut Marko have revealed about why Tsunoda's in for Lawson, with the engineering team and somehow ex-technical chief Adrian Newey sort of being named as reasons or excuses. So can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it's been quite an interesting kind of seeing Red Bull unpick this decision, because I think there's been a bit of a kickback from it. You know, quite brutal, giving someone 2 races and then you're out and that's enough. So I think they've been kind of trying to justify the reasons for it. So Christian Horner spoke to Sky at the Tokyo event you were at yesterday, basically explaining that it was the kind of engineering led. The engineers were concerned that Lawson wasn't making the steps, wasn't confident enough in the car, and that's kind of what triggered the decisions on top of the poor results. Then Helmut Marko has given some interviews, and kind of the pair of them have been analysing what's happened, and Helmut suggested actually Adrian Newey was behind this. The collision between Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda at the 22 British Grand Prix, they collided. Debris left on the track, which Max Verstappen ran over and cost him performance, was a big incident at the time. Marko suggested, Newey was furious.
Never let it go.
Never let it go. And this is the reason why Yuki has never been picked for Red Bull. And this is why suddenly, with Newey no longer at Red Bull, this is what's happened. But that prompted a very interesting reply on Twitter today, or X as it's now known, from Amanda Newey, who obviously keeps an eye on everything that's being said. And just a quite simple message in a reply to a story. She said, "That doesn't make sense. He was on garden leave." So the Newey thing doesn't make any sense either, because even the end of last year, when they made this decision between Liam and Yuki, Adrian wasn't there anyway, so it's nonsense.
It does feel a little bit like searching for excuses. And I actually asked Max Verstappen this, we'll come to him in a minute, and said, do you feel that Red Bull's taking enough accountability for the decision, the lack of development and stuff like this? It feels a little bit like reaching from people within Red Bull management, doesn't it? And sort of trying to share out the blame, basically.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it was a decision made by a lot of people, and ultimately the decision they made last winter was wrong. So it was wrong either to believe that Lawson was prepared enough or could make the steps necessary. It was wrong not to believe that Yuki didn't have the strengths and capabilities to do. Because as much as they talk about Yuki being a different class this year, I think it's just a logical step he would have made anyway. I don't think it's been a miraculous transformation. It's just been the Yuki that we could see glimmers of the end of last year. You spoke to Lauren Meckes, you spoke to Alan Permain, they were raving about him end of last year. So I think they're just trying to justify mistakes made a couple of months ago.
And I think it's fair to say, we don't really buy into those attempted justifications, and I don't think Verstappen does either. So I spoke to him earlier. It is the first time we've been able to hear his views from himself, because obviously Horner and Marko have effectively been speaking on Max's behalf. I think Marko had already said that Max was indicated he was unhappy with it. Horner had said that Max was surprised by the speed of the decision. But we know what Max thinks, and his critical position is quite clear, even though his actual phrasing was quite careful. He said, we was asked for his reaction, and said, everything has been shared with the team, how I think about everything. Sometimes it's not necessary to always share, let's say, everything in public. He also said that, you remember he liked that post from Guido van der Garde, ex-F1 driver, which had a lot of critical language, and Max said that speaks for itself and confirmed it was not an accident. So yes, we are allowed to read into that. I actually thought this was Max in really good form, getting his point of view across, but being quite clever with how he framed it, not saying anything too individually explosive, but you piece it all together, you read between the lines, and it's quite emphatic. But what's the reaction been elsewhere in the paddock today? Because I feel like every driver I've heard from has been asked about what they think of Red Bull's decision sooner or later. Yeah,
there seem to be two themes on it. The first, which is one Lewis Hamilton talked about, for example, he said it was harsh. After 2 races, you've got to have belief in these people. And Esteban Ocon talked about, the need for young drivers coming up. You can't always beat them with a stick. You need the carrot treatment sometimes. And a lot of the people who have made progress from similar scenarios, look at Pierre Gasly, Ocon, who had that year with Mercedes, Alex Albon, they went somewhere else, were looked after, nurtured, and have become successful since. But I think one also important aspect that a lot of drivers talked about was the fact that this isn't the end of Liam Lawson's career. He's retained in Formula One. He's still the same driver that has shown impressive pace in the past. And the Racing Bulls car isn't a bad car, to be honest. I mean, it looks super quick in qualifying. Hasn't delivered in races because of strategy reasons, but I see no reason why Liam Lawson can't get into Q3 this weekend if he hits the ground running. He could out-qualify Yuki, and it could be in a scenario in 2 races' time where everyone's scratching their heads and going, well, why would you in such a rush to change things? Because actually, all you've done is swap drivers with actually improved results.
Well, actually, that brings us, I think, back to Verstappen, because one of the things he has been very clear on is consistent messaging that the drivers, and the second driver in particular, aren't the problem with this. The car's the problem. He's talked a lot about the RB20's issues last year, the RB21's issues this year. He's been talking about that more today, and made it clear that he thinks if you got on top of what he's unhappy with in the car, let alone the second driver, everybody would benefit, including the second driver. So he's been pushing Red Bull not to sort of hide behind excuses. There was a meeting at Red Bull in the gap between China and Japan, in which they sort of laid out the development plan. Marco tried to sort of indicated that Max sort of was encouraged by that, and he didn't sound totally won over by it, to be honest. When I asked him, it was a bit of a sort of clever sidestepping of the answer. Marco's openly talking in other interviews as well about, they need to make a step with this car, otherwise they'll lose Max. So forget the drivers that they're willingly dropping. They might have one that wants to walk away. How worried should they be by that prospect?
I think more a medium-term worry than a short-term worry. I think Red Bull's problem at the moment is there's a danger it finishes 4th in the Constructors' Championship, which obviously has implications on costs. But also danger that they're going to have to keep developing and chasing answers for this car at the very time, ideally they're going to be switching off and focusing everything for 26, because they've got a bigger job than anyone else. They're switching to having their own engine, own power unit. They've got to do all the extra work. So out of all the top teams, they're the one that needs to stop earliest for the ideal scenario. So if they're behind, if they need to keep developing, keep pushing on and not get results, it's kind of a perfect storm of worse circumstances for them. But I think from Max's perspective, he's got a long-term contract. There are exit clauses. But I think if you're an intelligent driver now, you don't commit your future long-term beyond next year. I think you want to be a free agent at the end of 26. And probably from Max's perspective, he'd probably stick it out anyway in 26, unless this year turns to complete disaster. And then the world's your oyster. What if Ferrari have got the best power unit potentially, and Lewis decides, well, maybe I don't want to stay for the long term? What if there's a departure elsewhere? Mercedes could have a seat available. Someone left field, Audi could be sensational. You want to keep your options open for 27. So this is the problem for Red Bull, that if things start going wrong now, they snowball, and then into 27, you have a poor car, you've got trouble your power unit, you've lost your best driver, and things aren't looking very rosy.
Obviously, before Red Bull gets to the point of knowing whether it's got Verstappen 2026 and beyond, it needs to work out who his teammate will be. Tsunoda's in for the rest of the year, but Lawson was meant to be in the first place, so that means nothing. We should finish by talking about those two, because they are at the heart of this, and we've heard from them today. Tsunoda's been really impressive. I saw him at the Tokyo Show Run yesterday, saw him again today. He's handling it very well. He's got a very healthy attitude. But what about Liam Lawson? Because while it's all smiles for Yuki at the moment and words of encouragement, Lawson's in the tricky side of things, and you were in the FIA press conference where he was getting that barrage of questions.
Yeah, I think he's handled it really well, because I think it must be very difficult to be in this scenario where you've been the centre of a story. It's not ideal circumstances, getting dropped from your dream job after 2 races, to then walk into a big FIA press conference with everyone wanting to ask you questions. But he didn't shut down any answers. He didn't shirk from not wanting to say stuff. And I think he was very clever in getting the messaging across, that I think he felt it was a surprise that it happened after 2 races. I think also, I said to him, do you think with the circumstances you had, don't forget the water leak in the Bahrain test stopped him doing the long run. There in Australia, he lost practice because of a mechanical problem in FP3. Then he had a wet race, and then China, you're into a sprint and there's no time to catch up. So circumstances haven't been ideal. And with a little smile on his face, he says, I'd have hoped the team would have taken this into consideration, which I think was a very clear message. I think he felt that he should perhaps have been given at least this weekend a track he knows, proper race weekend to get on and do it. But I think it's done now. He's in his new environment. He's focused. He's got a car that is quite benign. It should be quick at a circuit he knows. So, we could come out of this weekend with Liam Lawson suddenly the superstar again.